Hello, it's Brad Laurie of BlockchainBrad, and today we're speaking about all things TheFoundry. And to do that, we have one of the co-founders of the Ferrum Network here to explain exactly what it is. And for transparency, this is entirely all about free information, free education about something that is innovative in the DeFi Incubator and essentially DeFi VC network. So thank you so much, Ian, for being here to let us know exactly what you're doing with both Ferrum and in the context of what we want to talk about today, and that is TheFoundry.
My pleasure, Brad. It's great to be here as always.
Likewise, mate. Now, again, it's late over there, and thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it because we're going to roll up the sleeves. I'm going to get transparent. I'm very clear about what TheFoundry is all about and how they're innovating. But Ian, a lot of people don't know about incubation. They don't know about how fundraising works, and certainly in the context of Ferrum. So do you want to give us a bit of a rundown on essentially what you're doing and how it's innovative?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't understand the typical incubator or VC model in the world of crypto, I mean, typically a project will sign on with one of these incubators or venture capitalists, or maybe they're sort of combined. And that VC will help them raise funds and bring them to market. Typically, that's where it ends. So there isn't really a long-term approach to most of these, most of the existing incubators. So we felt like there was a real opportunity to sort of combine our natural inclination, which is long-term support, with a decentralized fundraising model that our partners at DuckDAO have perfected over many years of being in the space. And then also imbuing the projects themselves with actual early utility for their token and technology, because that's another missing piece that VCs and incubators will, as far as I know, never offer. And then we also add an influencer side too. I'm happy to dive into all those areas, but together I think it's our goal is to drive value to not just the Foundry and Ferrum, but really to all the stakeholders, all the early investors in these new projects. I think by doing that, we can really help the space as a whole.
Right. So it's a game changer potentially. And that's the truth of why I wanted to talk to you. To be honest, I've been researching some of the attempts at moving towards more of that decentralized VC scenario. Difficult to find actually in this space, almost impossible. A lot of them are for-profit geared. A lot of them are still essentially masquerading as something more, but really a VC by design, like many of the traditional crypto VCs. So the connection with Ferrum, this is what I wanted to start with. Now, it says that you are empowering individuals with DeFi, and DeFi is the buzzword right now. We see the likes of things like yield farming as a big buzz. But how do you differentiate in the context of DeFi?
Sure. So we've taken quite a different approach to DeFi. We're really trying to bring this novel technology into the hands of those who might not be fully initiated in the space yet. Really taking it from the standpoint of new users and how we bring them into the space. And we've done this through a number of novel technologies that we built in our unifier wallet, namely link drop technology, which allows you to send crypto anywhere using a link. Something we call swap drops, which is a risk-free OTC transaction, again, embedded in a shareable link, and a host of other technologies like staking for any ERC20 token that we've just launched in the wallet. So the goal is not, running around chasing yields in what I view is potentially a non-sustainable ecosystem that is the present state of DeFi. Really, how do we build tools to bring new people in the space and actually add value to crypto? I think that's a pretty novel approach.
Absolutely, mate. And you hit the nail on the head with the concept of utility. It's not something that is new to the crypto space. That's the reason why so many utility tokens have evolved and developed over time. But when we see the strength of governance, being valorized or tokenized, that's when the big question comes, how are we forgetting the baby? Is the baby being thrown out with the bathwater in the context of real use case, real utility in hype phases? So you're bringing back common sense into the equation and talking about real utility and real use. And what I'm really fascinated about is the network, the way in which all these different facets have come together with the Foundry, at the heart. And I'm happy to support all of this initiative, but I need to also dig deep and find out what you're about. So let's explore some of the things that have happened. You've combined essentially two forces, yourself with your experience with Ferrum Network and the DuckDAO. And it says that you have this new decentralized fundraising model with the best influencers, projects, exchanges, and we talked about DeFi. So do you want to qualify that? Do you want to sort of pitch to us how that's the case, how these two forces make something that hasn't been done before?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it makes sense to sort of go one by one across those categories. And we can start with the fundraising, right? Because that's, to me, one of the biggest problems with the sort of existing VC model, which is essentially VCs who invest large sums of money into these early stage projects, and then they hold an inordinate amount of tokens and wield far too much power over those projects. And if they don't have a long-term interest in them, that can be very dangerous for those projects. And certainly it's dangerous for the unsuspecting retail investors who oftentimes are the ones who get quote unquote dumped on when the token is finally listed.
Right.
So by decentralizing it, and by that I mean just ensuring that instead of 10 or 5 or even 20 investors get in, thousands of investors are getting into the early stages of the project. You then have thousands of holders, and these are real people. These are real just people in the crypto communities that Ferrum's built over the past 2 years, that Duck has built, and they've become real supporters. So that means when the project launches, say we list on, they list on Uniswap, they have thousands of holders on day one instead of, handful. That's the key difference.
Let's talk about that for a moment, because that's a big deal, mate. That is honestly one of the number one reasons why I wanted to talk to you. And that's because, as a researcher, not just an educator in the space and not just an investor, and often in the secondary market, might I add, I haven't been doing allocations left, right, and center like so many. But I think it's interesting because when you do the research, you quickly realize that there is a network of power. There is definitely a network of privilege, and there's a network of VCs globally that really do get in, and make sure that they can essentially capitalize on their early advantage and and just their clout that they have and the ability to, converse at that level and enter into that level and exit, as you mentioned. Now, for many years, actually, people have been complaining, the everyday person, that they just really can't stand this hierarchy of power. They can't stand the access problem, but they haven't really had a voice. They haven't had a means to do this. And if you look really deeply into the current scenario, not a lot's changed. Maybe the labels from VC to venture DAO have changed, but if you research many of them, they're still for profit. They're still very much about requiring accredited, investor status in many instances, not a game changer. So are you saying that you do something that they don't?
Well, I think so. I mean, and again, when you open up an investment opportunity, early investment opportunity to thousands of people, as we do across the DuckDAO community, now the Ferrum community, which comprises the Foundry, I think that is a fundamental difference. But I think also the fact that when you bring in everyday investors, these are not necessarily for people that are purely driven for a profit, right? They're in theory going to be long-term supporters of the project. In fact, we as a part of that access that we grant our community members, they actually have to demonstrate some long-term interest in the project, and they have to actually help the project in whatever way they can. I think to me that is really, it has the ability to be a game changer. We haven't proven ourselves yet, so I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. But I do think the Foundry brings something really unique to the investment side. But it's not just the investment side, because it's also the technology side. It's the long-term advisory. It's the influencers we're working with. So it's really the entire package.
Yeah. And mate, I couldn't be more excited about this kind of potential. And I stress the word potential because, really just embarking, it's just the beginning for you. But I'm excited to hear this conversation happening. And I'm so excited to see the praxis and the pragmatic approach to change. Now, what's interesting, if we go back a bit, discussing the potential of broken models of the past, when you talk about things like influence, what's really interesting in my own research as well is that you quickly learn once you dig into crypto deeply that influence is not just on crypto Twitter. It's not just on YouTube. There's a whole, deep, implication when it comes to influence, all the way from media to exchanges to CEOs to VCs. It's a really strong web of power. Now, when you talk about having credible influences there for the long term, what's interesting is that many people who are in the VC camp, for example, or the exchange camp, or the media crypto camp, they would say the same. They'd say that they have people there for the long term as well. So what's different in that sense? Like, if we're talking about long-term support, how do you find those kinds of people? How do you incentivize, long-term belief and long-term holding when we've seen so much crypto crap in the space and so much BS as well, in terms of many of them, even at the very top echelon of crypto, are not holding. They're just promoting and then moving on at some stage.
Right. No, it is a big problem. I think it fundamentally comes down to transparency and honesty. Because if an influencer is transparent that they've invested in a project, which they're legally required to do before they market or promote it, and they're honest about what they believe in about the project, why they invested, that is a very different approach to, here's 2 Bitcoin, talk about this project for 3 minutes on your YouTube channel. That to me is a fundamental difference. And the way we structure this, and I want to give all credit to one of the core members of the Foundry who's come up with this model, Philip Dao, he's a good friend of mine, and one of the influencers we actually have on the Foundry team, who will remain unnamed. Mm-hmm. But they've come up with this model that essentially provides these influencers who've all been vetted for being legitimate, high quality, respected people across Twitter, YouTube, Telegram, and other outlets. Mm-hmm. Essentially the deal we have with them is you can invest in this project. We will give you early access to this project as we would give early access to some our community members in Ferrum or Duck. Mm-hmm. If you invest, you have to disclose that you've made an investment, and you have to promote them for at least a minimum of 3 months. And if you don't follow through in your obligations, in your promises you made to us in the project, you won't be invited back for later allocations. Right. So there's sort of a carrot and a stick element to it to keep folks in line. But I think, I've seen the list of people. I know a lot of the influencers on the list. They're well respected. They're good people, and I think structuring it in this way is very unique, and is gonna bring a lot of value to not just the Foundry, not just the projects, but to the investors as well.
I see. And mate, thanks for mentioning Phil also, because if he's a key, architect and key proponent and key sort of person who's really helped the Foundry evolve, he definitely deserves that acknowledgement. But I think, you hit the nail on the head once again in referencing the long-term sort of focus of your whole endeavor. And that's got to be reflected in the influences, and even move beyond just the idea of influencing, in the sense of educating about what they've invested in, what they believe in as well. They're putting their money where their mouth is. That's the big game changer from what I'm hearing. And as someone also, to be transparent, absolutely I'm interested in this. I am considering, once again, after years of not doing allocations or getting involved in that world, to do it again. Because if there's going to be this sustained focus on legitimate startups with real utility and very transparent influence as well, who wouldn't want to be involved in something like that, particularly when in the past there's been a lot of secrecy. There's been a lot of payments and a lot of exit scams as well, or dare I say just exiting regardless of scams, because of the ease of just switching to the new narrative and the new startup. You are literally trying to say, well, hang on, we got to pull the brakes on some of this stuff and actually get down to the business of utility and really build proper narratives for real reasons. That is a game changer, Ian, and it's something that we just haven't seen enough of.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it is a game changer. It presents no shortage of challenges. I think there's an issue in this space in general with short-term thinking and get-rich-quick mentality that I've been fighting against for 2 years as a founder of Ferrum, because there's no such thing as get rich quick. Work hard, do the right thing, and eventually you will succeed, and you'll do it in the right way, and you can go to sleep at night knowing you've done the right thing. And we can bring that mindset to not just it's the projects, it's the influencer part of this. It's instilling this long-term investor mindset in the community, not a short-term flipper mindset that's unfortunately been pervading the space. I think we can make a real difference. But again, we have to do our jobs. We have to find excellent projects. We have to make sure these, make sure these influencers do their jobs. We have to do our jobs, and the investors have to also embrace this sort of novel approach of long-term, investing, which is not sort of natural to the crypto space, unfortunately.
Which is kind of ironic, if you think about it. I always found it to be that anyway. Even when I was working as an ambassador for a project, and I would converse with some of the influencers, often, I was so shocked when I would get the response back from some saying, "I'm sorry, unless there's payment involved, I'm not interested." And that was remarkable to me, because I come from, thinking of invest is best. And when I say invest, I don't just mean think of it like you're purchasing something as an asset. I'm also talking about investing in a prospective utility, because when I would invest early, when I did in 2017-18, I always knew that investment was prospective. You were literally supporting something you didn't know would happen or not, but you hoped they would build it because you had a white paper and you had a team. So it's the same thing, and the vetting, as you mentioned, is going to be the key as well. If everything's built on eggshells or built on narratives that don't come to fruition, then there's real no point. And so that's what I also want to discuss with you today, and we'll get to that, I promise. Now, in terms of partners, what was very interesting is you have specific ones like KuCoin, Buybox, the Serum Dex, ACDX as well. No plugs intended, but those partners do matter. Strong Asian influence there as well. Do you want to touch on the why of the partners, the who of the partners, and how they interrelate with what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing we realized early on in conceiving of the Foundry is that if we're really going to help these projects and we're really going to drive value to the investors, we need to think about what happens after launch. We need to think about growth. And for better or worse, we're still largely in a market where centralized exchanges do matter. And so we needed to bring some along. And we were very fortunate in being able to connect early on with the likes of KuCoin, Serum, Buybox, and others. And I just want to be fairly clear about the relationships we have with those exchanges and how that relates to the project. We're not guaranteeing listings on these exchanges. Ultimately, the exchange still has a say, of course. The project still has a say, of course. What we can do is we have relationships, and we have this preferred exchange partnership essentially with these exchanges, and so we can facilitate the listing process, but it doesn't mean it's guaranteed, right? So I just want to be perfectly transparent about it. But I do think you brought up a good point about geography as well, because one thing we've seen recently in this market is there's been sort of a power structure established out really in San Francisco.
Yep.
In the DeFi scene there with those VCs, and there isn't a lot of transparency. I think there's probably things going on behind the scenes that I'm not going to speculate on, but
Ian, let's go. I'm going to help you out here. So I know you can't say everything, but I'm going to say a few things to help you out. Now, absolutely, even being referenced by some of the stars of media. One of them is Larry from The Block. He was questioning the situation with the West versus the East. Now, the reality is, absolutely, you are 100% right. There is a power struggle. There is a power play. And there's certainly power players when it comes to trying to, create this illusion of, some sort of semblance of what is better in the West as opposed to the East. And that's all just BS. The reality is it all comes down to startups. It all comes down to the credibility of the team and the tech, no matter where they're situated in the world. So we can remove all of that BS from the equation right now, because geography is just not relevant when it comes to technology and innovation. What is true, though, if you dig deep, is the power play that does happen among VCs that all send each other, their investment portfolios. And, it's a, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, have a look. But the reality is there's a lot more to crypto and there's a lot more to the future of this industry than the connections at the top.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think this industry is incredibly diverse, not just across geographies, but personality types and ethos, and there's no shortage of opportunities to fit whatever investment thesis you may have. But from the Foundry standpoint, we do not discriminate in terms of geography. Of course not. That would be foolish. We're looking for the best teams with the best ideas, the best technology, the strongest fundamentals, and who are willing to adopt the long-term mindset that we're trying to instill in the Foundry and really in the entire crypto space. So we found some really promising, exciting new projects that we'll be rolling out starting actually next week that I think people are really going to love. And I'm really excited to reveal it all to you guys in the next coming days.
You could reveal it now, as you know. No, we'd love it if you did. And, I don't want to come across like I'm also shilling the endeavor, because it's not my intention. It's just that there's so much that isn't said. There's such a lack of transparency when it comes to means and methods of fundraising, especially early investor access. Now, if we go back to that discussion of the East versus West, we remove that from the equation. How do you, though, address this when you know that certain VCs are connected with certain exchanges? We don't need to name names. It's just so obvious. When you're trying to break into those barriers and there's all these closed doors of power because they all want to maintain that VC position, how do you get into some of them? And how do you convince some of these startups to take you seriously when the status quo has been investing in crypto VCs is best?
I think the only way to convince folks is to prove them wrong. When you start a new endeavor like this that is attempting to sort of disrupt the existing power structures, you're going to have skeptics, you're going to have doubters. So the only thing that we can do is succeed. And it's the same mindset we brought to Ferrum. I mean, Ferrum didn't get help from any of these power players. We were unknowns out of New York. I was practicing law when we started Ferrum.
I remember talking to you a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, so we've managed, I think, to succeed despite those challenges that we face and not having a single sort of anything really handed to us. So if we take this mindset of, if we work hard, if we bring fundamental value, if we do things right on the community side, the influencer side, the technology side, then value will be created, good things will happen, these projects will do well, and more projects will want to come on board. Right. But it's not something that happens overnight. And, it's going to be interesting to see in 4 or 5 years from now where the Foundry is relative to some of these existing power players.
May, I'm really excited about hearing all of this. To be honest, I hope more like the Foundry evolve and sort of heed what you're saying. What's interesting also is that for years, I think many people would agree, as a researcher, I always pay attention to the research houses of teams. Having also worked alongside other VC researchers, I take them very seriously. And that's because they also represent an immense, pool of funds. They are part of the decision makers for what that VC does invest in. Now, again, knowing there are networks, and they're undeniable, regardless of what you and I think, we can prove that via the blockchain. What you're kind of changing is the entire narrative of saying, hey, don't just go and do research on what the VCs are into. Don't use that as a marker or a measure of validity, because sometimes they're investing in shitcoins too. Sometimes they're investing in things that they don't stand by. So the reality is it's sometimes about power, and you're trying to bring back the discourse of utility.
100%. I think given enough time, fundamentals will always prevail over hype and speculation and connections. and those things that have, for the, at least in the near, in the past few months, have seemed to matter more. But I think given enough time, the projects that are solving real problems, bring real adoption, have real business models, those will succeed. And that's not to say that there's certain VCs that aren't investing in projects. I mean, of course there are, right? But there's more to crypto than those handful of projects and teams out in, the San Francisco Bay Area. There's a whole world of really good teams solving real problems with real technology. And that's what we're trying to bring those projects that may not have gotten the attention of VCs, but let's bring them to market. Let's help them too. It's like, 'cause it's not just about launching and marketing and this. It's really helping them build a product, scale it, get users, earn revenue, the things that Ferrum, without the help of any VCs, has managed to do.
Yep.
So that's what we're bringing to the table.
Exactly, mate. It's also why I supported Teller the way I did from the beginning, because I felt that they did the very best they could in the circumstances to launch in the most fair way. And right now there's a huge discussion of what actually constitutes a fair launch, which I'm sure you're an advocate for as well. Now let's pull it back to the DuckDAO for a second, because their ethos underpins a lot of what you stand for at TheFoundry. And they have said that they're the decentralized DeFi VC. Now, as I said before, I'd researched others, before I talked to you, and noticed many of them were for-profit geared. And they certainly had direct connections with those SanFran VCs, many of them. So they were investing in similar startups, no brainer what's going on there. So they disclosed with the DuckDAO that some of their investments are things like Staffy, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, Mantra DAO, I've spoken to them. No surprise with ACDX, Ramp DeFi, list goes on. So again, has some of that nuance of Asia, no surprise given that a lot of the team comes from there. But I'm more interested in seeing how you're going to evolve as the Foundry and maintain that same narrative of decentralized DeFi VC.
Yeah, I think the key is to really focus on how the raise occurs and how the tokens are distributed, right? Because the traditional model, again, is large amounts of tokens end up being held by a handful of large investors. And what that means essentially is that the project is at great risk, because these investors largely they're solely interested in profits for the most part. These aren't community members, right? And it's also not good for the space, because these for-profit VCs tend to just sell, right? As soon as they can profit. So the DuckDAO ethos that we've brought into the Foundry, because ultimately the DuckDAO community is the key part of the Foundry, is to provide access to these early stage investments, regardless of your status of who you are or where you're from or whatever. It's, are you a community member in DuckDAO? And are you able to bring value to this project in some way? And it could be as simple as tweeting about them or writing an article or helping build a website. I mean, it's an incredible thing. The Foundry website, believe it or not, was actually designed largely by 2 community members of DuckDAO. So these are people that are highly motivated. They want to help. They're true members of the crypto community. And that, to me, is the critical difference between our approach and the older ways.
It's really interesting, because even in a lot of the CEO interviews I do, often they're shocked when I explain I'm just trying to educate, I'm just trying to take part in that narrative, because they're so used to the other agenda for whatever it is. So you're espousing a whole new dynamic, a whole new means of entry for people who genuinely want to uplift the space longitudinally. So kudos to your whole team for building that idea in, because we need to see that more. Now, one of the things that I found interesting, let's say at this stage, is that with the DuckDAO, they have a token model. Now, is the Foundry going to do something like that? Because, and we'll be honest, I hope you don't. I'd like to see you focus on the tokens of the startups.
Yeah, no, I mean, the plan as of now is to continue with the token utility for DuckDAO token, and also include Ferrum token, which has a host of 5 or 6 more technology-based utilities that I could go into. But now we've introduced this sort of decentralized fundraising utility as well. And to me, that's sufficient, I think, on the token side for now. So I don't think we're going to go there. If for some reason we need to raise funds, which I don't anticipate, we may consider a small raise or something like that. But right now, how it works is if you hold a certain amount of DuckDAO, and there's tiers, DuckDAO tokens, you get access and satisfy other requirements. It's not quite as simple as just holding the tokens. You get to invest in the pre-sales. There's other requirements involved.
Right.
And same thing on the Ferrum side. If you hold 100,000 or 250,000 or all the way up to 750,000 Ferrum tokens, you'll have the right to access these investments. And in doing so, I think it provides excellent utility for our project's tokens, but it also provides an opportunity to our holders who, especially on the Ferrum side, these are folks who are not used to at all getting into early investment pre-sales in these sorts of opportunities. So I think it's going to be wonderful for the community members.
Okay, so let's talk about that though. So with the DuckDAO, the DDIM token, like you said, they do have tiers. So they have the incubator level, the strategic contribution level, and the general level. So very transparent. I had a look at it all. So if anyone wants to know, I'll leave a link down below and they can check it out. But what I wanted to understand from you is you're not going to have a token directly at this stage with the Foundry, but how does that relate to their token? Do you support that? Is there in any way a connection in that sense to build out the Foundry?
Yeah, so no, there certainly is a connection. So the same holding requirements that apply to DuckDAO specific projects, those will apply to Foundry projects, but it will also bring in the Ferrum community, because the Ferrum community will also have similar holding requirements, similar tier structures. But I think the unique thing about the Ferrum side is that, again, our community is not used to this. The DuckDAO community was designed specifically for fundraising. This is what they do. The Ferrum community is much more tech focused. Is much more about a utility token that involves our swap technology and our link drops and the tech we've built. And so now we're adding this extra layer of access to early stage investments. And I'm excited to give that opportunity to my community members who, frankly, probably haven't seen this side of crypto, and it can add a lot of value to them, I think.
Right. And it's good to see, I think, that, again, even with the DuckDAO tiers, they also have different sort of clubs, as it's known, from Fight Club, Beach Club, Gentleman's Club, Diamond, Duck All Stars. So really there's a lot of different means of entry based on the sort of the capital that, or the contribution you make, as I understand. Now, do you support that idea of tiers? Obviously we're talking about trying to evangelize more access. Now, how does that work for the average person who is the hard worker, is sustaining, their work in the role that they've moved into, the position that they've sort of entered in as? Do you support this kind of move up as you work, or should it be more egalitarian? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the best model is going to be a combination of both, because the truth is we're investing in early stage startups because they need capital to build their technology. So there is a need for capital. There's no doubt about that. But there's also a need for support outside of capital. There's a need for a true community. There's a need for things like tweeting and Medium articles and infographics and things that people who may not have the capital to invest can still add value. And I think the model that DuckDAO and really the Foundry have implemented has managed to marry those two needs. But yeah, we're not, look, at the end of the day, we're not opposed to evolving. In fact, we want to evolve. We want to see how this first raise and launch goes. And we'll see how, what was the fairness level? Could folks get in if they want to get in? Did we adhere to the sort of ethos that we're espousing?
Mm.
And if things didn't go as we wanted them to, we'll make changes. I mean, that's the bottom line. But I think now I like the model. I think it makes sense. But we're gonna wait and see how it plays out in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. And it's great to know that you're open to change with the team. Nothing worse than being set in stone and not being able to sort of innovate in that sense. Now, you mentioned we. So who is in this team of the Foundry? Is it transparent, or will it become more clear exactly who are the members that really affect change?
Yeah. So the Foundry is a partnership of Ferrum Network. So that's the team, the core team at Ferrum, myself, my co-founder Naeem, who frankly hasn't been as involved with the Foundry because his role is really to build the technology that we provide to the Foundry projects. But then also you have the Duck founders, Ken and Lucas,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have Philip Dao,
Mm-hmm.
and we have our unnamed influencer who's chosen to remain unnamed. But
For
I'll
now, we'll find him.
that.
Wherever you are, mate, we'll get to you.
It's a great team of all good guys, and we're just here. We're here to add value and make the space a better place.
Got it. Now, mate, marketing you mentioned is really important. You've got the team there, and you've got the connections, and you've got two significant players in the space already, especially with the DuckDAO with their clout and the magnitude of influence they've built. But incubation is imperative. So having the right sort of structure in place, making sure that there's legitimate startups onboarding into this process from the get-go. Talk us through that. How does it all work? How do you vet? How do you make sure that there's a clean sort of approach to this as well?
Yeah, that's certainly a lengthy and complex process. We take the vetting side extremely seriously. We've already turned down a number of projects that we felt didn't reach the caliber that we're looking for. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about early stage startups that largely don't have live products, you are going based on your confidence in the team.
Mm-hmm.
And so we spend hours and hours and hours working closely with the team, getting to know them, understanding.
And who's we? Who's we?
The core Foundry team. So, myself, Ken, Lucas, Phil,
Mm-hmm.
and the influencer that we have on board.
Hopefully the influencer's a researcher.
Yeah, I mean, they, in fact, these guys have research teams as well. So it's not just us. Okay. We have research teams behind us too that are looking at some of the nuances.
Good.
But at the end of the day, I mean, it really does come down to team.
Yep.
At this early stage, and so that's why it's weeks on end of working closely with them before we sign a contract.
Okay. And that's what we want to hear, that there is this due diligence that's done, not even just over a week. So, that's what I think a lot of people want to make sure is that you're doing a lot of that initial groundwork to make sure that you make that right move, because now that you're just starting, making a few wrong moves could be disastrous for the Foundry. So you've got to get this right from the beginning. Now, let's pull it across to some of the ones coming. Like you have a section that says upcoming projects, and then there's this space, there's nothing there. I was thinking,
blurry images, right?
Right. And I was thinking, it looks like 3 blurry images. Is there a reason why it looks like that? I mean, do you have more in the pipeline as well, other than this one coming very soon?
So we have more that we're working with the early stages. We have not signed deals with anyone other than the one that's coming up. That's not to say we won't.
Okay.
Sign deals imminently with a few more of them. But I think one of the keys to success, because you're absolutely right, we have to get this right with the projects. That is absolutely critical. So we have to make them succeed, right? Because a lot of these guys, they may have a great idea, they may have a great tracker, but they may not have a tremendous experience in crypto, right? Crypto's a different animal, as you and I know.
Exactly.
So,
yep.
We have to make sure that they're successful, and that takes a lot of hands-on work.
Yep.
So it's not just, we can't just do one after the next, boom, boom, every 3 days. there's going to be a lag period in between each, and I hope folks understand that that's actually in the best interest of everybody involved.
Mm.
If we take our time with each and get it right with each. But no, I mean, there's three. I think there's just three on there because it just, it just looks better.
All right. Well, what I know now from what you said is there is a pipeline of startups. You are looking at some. One is definitely coming within a week. Very interesting. Now, I want to just get real about platforms for a second. Now, we talked about some of the collusion, I did anyway, and we talked about the possibility of some of that sort of dichotomizing of East versus West crap that needs to be removed. But also in that context, we also see sort of platform centrism emerging with certain camps, or certain maximalism, that's becoming quite ubiquitous among certain groups of people. So what are your thoughts on this? Are you taking a very agnostic, a very impartial position when it comes to platforms as well? And I ask you this in the context of the startups that are coming on the Foundry. I mean, for example, are you looking at Ethereum as equally as, for example, Solana, as Polkadot, of Cosmos and beyond?
So our emanating approach to everything we do with the Foundry, all decisions we make, is what is in the best interest of the project and what's in the best interest of the stakeholders. So we don't have, I certainly don't have a personal preference on which blockchain the project chooses to associate with or build on, or it really comes down to what makes sense given their roadmap, their technology they're building. Obviously, the market conditions do play a role. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that there aren't more quote unquote hot blockchains out there than others, and look, we're trying to make this success, so we're not going to swim against the tide just for the sake of it. But at the end of the day, it's about doing what's right for the project, and if we do that, then we'll succeed and good things will happen.
Got it. Okay. So how do you break the challenge or break the barriers down with some exchanges that are subscribing to some of that centrism and maximalism when it comes to, for example, trying to support one certain platform? I won't name names, but say, for example, you want to break into Kraken and break into the market with Coinbase. You want to get on their good side. How do you do that if there is nuances of sort of camps emerging?
Well, I think you have to be aware of those camps, and you have to have positive relationships with key players in the various ecosystems, and we do have those relationships. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's in the Foundry's interest or in the interest of the projects for us to so quickly align ourselves with any particular camp, especially this early on. The space moves so quickly that it's foolish to, I think, to say, okay, we know who the winner is going to be in this, Ethereum versus Polkadot or Ethereum versus whatever, thing that's been going on in this space for a while. So we're not going to take that approach. Again, it's best interest of the project, best interest of the stakeholders, and as long as we have those connections in various ecosystems across the space, and I think we can do a lot of good.
Got it. Now, what's interesting also, Ian, is that with the approach you're taking, with the whole sort of array of all the facets that are built into the model of the Foundry, it's not going to actually play out. I would imagine that it's sort of the success depends on the listings. So what I mean by that is that in the past, we've seen a gradual increase in price appreciation that correlates with all the different listings, and the stepping stones move up until the top so-called listing occurs. Now, with the long-term approach that you build in, that's not really going to matter because the support's going to go and surpass the listing.
Yeah, I think this notion that a listing guarantees much of anything anymore is quickly been revealed to be a fallacy. Mm-hmm. We've seen with the rise of Uniswap and other DEXs that you don't necessarily need centralized exchanges to be successful. Now, that being said, there are many participants in the market who don't trade on Uniswap for whatever reason. That's okay. People should have options. So we're not going to sit here and say we're anti-centralized exchanges, we're only doing DEXs or whatever. But no, I think if you take the long-term approach and you focus on things like utility, you focus on things like community, you focus on fundamentals of transparency and honest dealings, that the projects will do well over time. And
Right.
they'll eventually be invited into these. I mean, if you do well enough, you get invited onto the tier one exchanges without even having to pay.
That's the
So
idea, isn't it? We remove the whole pay to play from the equation and just really try to advocate for and try and evangelize free listings. 'Cause that's the idea of good quality startups, and that's what we see is starting to happen now with the startups themselves. Obviously, you've talked to some. You're not disclosing this one coming, but you'd have to pitch, your narrative, your position to these startups, to these teams of so-called good tech. Now, I wanted to ask you, what do you say to them? What's the feedback from them as well that really sells this to the startup? Because one of the things that is interesting I've read into is that you do cap those allocations for the influencers to make it more distributed. So I'd love to hear your take on what the feedback's been from them and how you pitch this.
that's a good question. I think you'd have to ask the founders themselves what causes them to sign up. I know. Speaking specifically about the first project we'll be incubating, that they spoke with a number of incubators. They spoke with a number of VCs and the like, and ultimately went with us, even though we were completely unproven. And frankly, the founder of that project really only knew me. He
Okay,
didn't
so they had
know.
the option of all the other VCs. That sounds like a project that is going to have a good reputation and a team that's being taken very seriously by a lot of people. Again, not FOMOing, but
Yeah,
it is
absolutely. I
FOMO.
mean, no,
Sorry.
it's a fantastic team. I've known the founder for over a year now, maybe 2 years now. He's from New York. I'm also from New York. Really good guy. Been in the space for a long time. Brought some excellent developers and marketers along with him, and the idea is incredibly solid. There's already a really strong business plan behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens to be sort of a buzzy project too, because it's involving the Polka ecosystem. So it sort of checks all
Okay.
as
Well,
far
that's
as I'm concerned.
interesting because I'm a big fan of some of the innovations happening over at Parity as well. And of, as you know, links to Polkadot. Gavin obviously is a very significant player right across the board, and rightly so, as one of the co-founders of Ethereum. So don't get me started on Polkadot, but it's good to know that there's a connection. No wonder the VCs are actually biting at the bit to get involved.
Yeah, I think so. And I think once we reveal this project and start our work on it as the Foundry, and the influencers come on board and the communities get behind it, I think it's going to be a real force to be reckoned with in the space. And I'm just excited
Well,
to bring it out on Monday.
Well, I'm telling you right now, and in full transparency, I mean, I don't have any allocations, so obviously don't even know what this project is, but I damn well want to know, and I'm definitely considering allocations, and I'm definitely considering taking part in the Foundry and learning more about this. So let's move across, though, to, once again, the strategy that we talked about before. So we see things like the promo for 10x, the Uniswap phenomenons, all this. Now, how do you stop all that from happening when you have such strong influences that have credibility, arguably? How do you stop all of the hype from accelerating to such a pace that it sort of outstrips the utility itself?
That's a great question. I think that is the other key reason why projects have been so interested in working with the Foundry, and that comes down to the technology that Ferrum Network as a project can provide these newer, startup projects. Because typically what will happen is a new project will raise a bunch of money, launch on Uniswap, may do very well initially, just based purely on hype, but most of the time they'll have no technology. They'll have no product. They'll have no
Mm.
utility for their token whatsoever. And the market will then find a fair value for that project, and that always is less than what the hype has given it. So one thing that Ferrum does is provide these projects with a host of different DeFi related technologies to
Mm-hmm.
provide their tokens some early utility and some early value. Not to say it's their core utility, not to say it's a replacement for what they're doing long term, but with something like our staking mechanism, which provides participants an opportunity to sort of interact with the token, lock it up, earn some rewards over time. Things like that provide that early utility and give projects time to build their own tech. So they don't have a situation where it pumps and then a month later everyone's lost interest because they haven't launched their product, they haven't done anything notable on the tech side, and everyone leaves to the next new hype project.
Right.
So that's really what Ferrum brings to bear, in addition to, you know, founders' perspective, the long-term advisory approach, you know, the experience we have in scaling products and generating revenue. But the technologies, that's something I think no other incubator, to my knowledge, is able to offer.
I see. So really it's about scaffolding. It's that long-term scaffolding approach to the construction of quality utility. You know, you're leading the way in that sense. And it's interesting because in the past, sometimes the public have been harsh on some influencers who've done recurrent content on certain startups. They've said, oh, you're nothing but a shiller. But interestingly, now people are saying thank you to those parties who've done it for free, or they've done it because they've invested, and only that reason, when no one else was there. So I'm going to do something that I've never really, it's going to shock a few people. I'm going to plug Chico Crypto for a second. Now, that'll shock him too. But here's an example of someone who did buy into projects and repeatedly, you know, spoke of them for whatever reason and for his own belief and for his own community. And, you know, I'm not trying to plug myself, but I believe in that philosophy too. I stand by that and I've proven myself. I think that that's the kind of exemplar we need in crypto, is those kinds of people who are saying transparently, yep, I invested. Yes, I believe in it. And even if we're wrong, at least we did that, you know, and there are more people starting to lead, you know, by that, from those examples, I think. And I think that the Foundry is a really good example of transitioning a whole group of people in that way of thinking. So what I wanted to do is ask you about the DuckDAO's influences for a second. Now, I went through and had a quick look. There's a huge continuum there. You know, vast array of influences. I'm not going to go into them all. People can do that themselves. But I wanted to ask you more directly, what differentiates your influences, you know, in the context of really uplifting quality, and the DuckDAO's approach, because they have a huge network.
Yeah, so I don't think there's necessarily a differentiation between, you know, I don't view it that way as Foundry influencers being so different than Duck influencers. The deal is really the same. I mean, we basically present these opportunities to the influencers, and we say, okay, here, you know, this is the fundamentals, these are the token metrics, this is the opportunity, this is why we like the project. You have the option to get an allocation. Everyone gets the same allocation.
Okay.
It's totally fair and transparent. If you choose to get an allocation, you then have an obligation to promote and market that project as you do, whether you're a Twitter influencer, whether you know, YouTube content creator, whether you have a Telegram community with AMAs or whatever it is you do, you need to do that for the project. And you have to do it ongoing. That's the key, right? That's something that you just hit on is, you know, if you just do one video and then you're on to the next, that doesn't add a lot of value to the project. Doesn't really add a lot of value to the influencers community, frankly. It's just a means of lining the influencers' pockets because they get paid X amount of dollars every time they do that.
Right.
So by basically making this a long-term commitment, and by the way, if they fail in that commitment, they don't get future allocations.
I love this model. It's
really
great.
Changing the structure to the influencer. So I think whether it's a DuckDAO, whether it's a Foundry, I don't really distinguish, frankly, between those so much. It's because it's the same ethos, really, no matter what we're talking about.
And that's a really good point, because it comes down to really the open access through the allocation model and the work hard, work for the long term, or bugger off. I like that. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was tokenomics for a second, because I can still see there's a risk involved in a model like this if the tokenomics are such that it enables for serious inflation or serious price appreciation rapidly. Now, I'm going to reference one startup now. A lot of people won't like it, but Wi-Fi is an example. Now, I'm not going to comment on legitimacy or validity. It's a game changer when it comes to the technology. I will say that. But we also seen built into this is a very scarce model with 30,000 tokens as the total supply. Now, if you throw that into the equation of something coming for the Foundry, for example, there's going to be, I would argue, a very high risk of faster price appreciation in the context of the power of the whole thing you're building. So do you really look at that? Do you take part in advising in tokenomic design so that you can actually ensure for long-term, sound price appreciation that makes sense when it comes to the context of utility?
Absolutely. One of the things that I think really separates the Foundry, in addition to everything we spoke about, the technology, the influence, the tokenomics, and the expertise that Ken and Lucas bring to that side of the equation is really nothing short of spectacular. I mean, I've seen Ken in particular work magic with tokenmetrics very quickly. He immediately spots the issues. Oh, this is going to work because it's going to cause this problem or that problem, and he's able to craft something that works in not just the short term. Because look, there's nothing wrong with we want the investors in the project to make returns. There's nothing wrong with that, but it needs to be sustainable over the medium and the long term. And I don't agree personally with this approach of making an extremely scarce token that ends up being worth $20,000, because to me it's antithetical to the decentralized approach we're taking and this notion of being sort of fair access.
Yep.
Because if you have a token that's worth so much, it doesn't make a ton of sense. So
no. Especially if in that sense there's a lot of early farming or early mining VCs. And that's the crux of what we're talking about. That's what I'm trying to allude to, is avoiding that scenario, whether they're VCs or whether they're me, whether they're, the next, privileged person who's getting into an allocation.
Yeah, I mean, the approach we're always going to take is, again, what's in the best interest of the project, what is in the best interest of the stakeholders. And I can't think of a scenario where making an extraordinarily scarce token would be of value to much anyone other than, I suppose, the early people. But that's not. But again, that's, if we're thinking about the long term, we want this project to succeed over the year, 2 years, 3 years. Then the token metrics have to make sense given that long-term framework. And I just don't see how you can square our approach with an extraordinarily scarce token model. So I would be very surprised if I saw any of the Foundry team members pushing for something like that. And I don't anticipate that ever happening.
I'm so glad to hear that. Now, one thing that's interesting is if I take a different perspective for a moment, let's say that I am a speculator. I'm also someone who isn't going to get allocations because I don't have the time to go and invest in, or I don't have the resources, whatever, to go and take part in the influence side of things. And what's great is they could if they wanted to, and they work hard. Let's say I don't want to, but I also want to take the position of the speculative aspect of this game, and I want to support some of the Foundry related startups that have come forth. Now, what's the incentive for someone in that situation to respect the influences? What's the incentive to respect the whole system you've built if they want to, when it arrives into the speculative secondary market, support, invest in future utility or even current utility, the mainnet's out? Why should they endorse a hierarchy of access?
So again, I think everyone who may be interested in investing in a Foundry project or any project needs to do their own research, needs to determine whether a project fits their investment thesis and whether it represents fair market value and all those things that I think a normal, rational investor would do before making a decision. I think the difference between our model and others is the level of transparency. Mm-hmm. Because a person can know that, okay, so say influencer X is promoting this project. Well, there's a disclaimer made before the promotion period begins that says to the effect, I've made an investment in this project, which, by the way, is a legal requirement that, as far as I can tell, most influencers don't do.
They don't. So I wanted to touch on that. So do you demand that all of those signed up do that?
Yes, we have language that we've crafted that we believe complies with the disclosure requirements really in any jurisdiction, and they can create their own version. But yeah, the gist is that they need to disclose that they've made an investment, But they should want, they should want to make an investment. We don't force them to make investment in Foundry projects, by the way. We have the influencer group that we put together. We present them a project and they can make a choice whether they do or don't. And if they did, presumably they had a reason they did, and then they can explain to their community why they did. And that to me is legit. That's a legitimate form of marketing. It's not shill, organic. It's transparent. And so, look, I mean, at the end of the day, if someone's missed out on the pre-sale or didn't want to participate, who wants to get in the secondary market, do your research, understand the process. Obviously, we're an open book. If you ever want to ask us, the founders of the Foundry, how, why we made a decision about why to incubate or what we like about the, whatever, we'll answer the questions. And then, but ultimately at the end of the day, I mean, this is still, you're investing in early stage tech startups. It's inherently risky. We can't guarantee their success. They could fail.
Exactly. Now, I want to talk about this.
Make sure they don't.
Yeah, and mate, having been someone who's invested in this context, I want to really get it across to the audience as well that there is risk when it comes to lockups, for example. It's not just all rosy when it comes to allocations. I personally have invested in allocations where they haven't listed yet, and it's been a really long time. So there definitely is degrees of risk, and that's okay to say. Now, one of the things I wanted to get clear on is lockups and things like that, because one thing that I find interesting is there is a degree of freedom in the secondary market because you're in control of your own liquidity. You're in control more of your own decisions, and you don't rely on any other party. Now, when it comes to allocations and things like that, there is also reliance arguably on somebody or something because, it's a time block. So how do you design this so that we can trust, because trust is with people, not with code. How do we trust that you're building sound systems so that people don't just get dumped on by, all these early entrants that, in the past have had day one unlocks for, with insane percentages?
Yeah, so that's really, really important for us. It's something we've spoken about at length with the project we're incubating now and in general our approach, because we've seen, the Duck guys have been in the space for far longer than I have. And they've been involved in hundreds of raises, and they've seen how things can go awry when you fail to structure the token metrics in a fair and reasonable way. So, how we structure them is sort of project dependent, largely, right? Like when these unlocks happen, and that depends on how much is raised and many factors. But the key, I think, is to ensure that no one party has too many tokens unlocked too quickly. Because what can happen is if they decide they want to exit their position early on, that can ruin everything for everybody. So,
well, we saw what happened with Sushi Swap with the debacle with the chef. It's a perfect example, when there's just, because it's not a reflection. I want to make this clear. It's not a reflection on code in that instance. That's a personal decision that person made to do what they did. So that can have a huge destructive ripple effect all the way to, ending the success for the team. So you building this model and taking this seriously is actually a way of respecting the team's work.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, right? Because you even with perfectly crafted unlocks, if the team decides to exit or something like that, then of course we're in big trouble. So that's where the due diligence comes in. That's where the trust comes in, because you're right, we're ultimately dealing with people, not code.
Yeah.
But there are certain technological security measures we can put in place, and I know there's really strong teams building sort of security measures around Uniswap listings and around unlocks, around team lockups, and so we're looking forward to implementing some of those security measures. But yeah, at the end of the day, there is risk to this. It's investing in an early stage company. You're trusting the founders to do the right thing in many respects. And again, so there, we talk about disclaimers. There's going to be plenty of disclaimers when it comes to Foundry projects, because there are risks to investing. That's just the reality of this business.
Well, mate, I appreciate all the transparency, honestly, and all these different tough questions I've thrown at you. One of the ones I did want to touch on is the media partners, because Again, this will surprise many people, but we have the likes of someone like Ivan on Tech and also Michael Gu of Box Mining as those media partners. Now, what's interesting is that I would assume that there's some sort of paid role in this as well. My apologies for the audio, something's going wrong. But I wanted to find out more about those media partners as well. What do they actually do? Because, I'll say this openly, everyone knows that I don't have the best rapport with Ivan on Tech for many reasons in the past. But I'm able to overlook that, you know, for the discussion now, because I simply want to know what his role is in this. And I want to be professional and focus on specifically the Foundry. So what is Ivan on Tech? And Michael Gu, he's really well known in the space of being himself. You know, he'll say what he thinks, and he doesn't really take a, you know, I would argue a sort of biased opinion. He's quite forthright, and he has a very strong experience in Asia. So that made sense to me. So why these two? What do they do?
Sure. So, I mean, I think everyone, for the most part in the crypto space, knows Ivan on Tech. They know Box Mining. They have tremendous followings. They've been in the space for a long, long time. And I think they have a unique role in adding value to the Foundry projects to just provide them a platform, to just give them exposure, right?
Okay.
And again, everything is disclosed. Everything is
I see.
you know, yeah.
So Ivan on Tech is like the PewDiePie effect.
Well, Ivan on Tech will choose to promote a project or not promote. He'll do a segment on a project, right? That's what he does segments, more or less, right? As far as I know. And so he can do a segment on a project talking about the fundamentals, what he likes about the project, what he doesn't, what he wants to see from them going forward. You know, his typical analysis. But I think having folks like Ivan on Tech and Box Mining as a part of our influencer ecosystem does drive a lot of value, because these are people with large followings and projects. I mean, this is still a marketing driven space. You can have the best tech in the world. And if no one knows about it, then you're not going to be successful. So you need to there needs to be a marriage of fundamentals and marketing. And those guys are an important part of it.
You know what? It makes sense. I find this palatable if the startup is sound and if there's someone like the Foundry is behind this, because all the vetting, all the work in that sense is being done. You know, so for a media partner with a huge platform, it makes sense. It's very different if that doesn't take place and they're simply shilling a shit coin because of a huge platform, if you get what I mean. So that's why I'm being hard, because in the past that's occurred in different times from different parties and different platforms, different people. So I'm all for trying to clean up the space and trying to make sure that media can lead out quality. So what's the context here? Are they getting allocations as well, or are they just paid as media partners?
To my knowledge, they are simply paid as media partners, but they'll have the option of, I believe they'll have the option of investing. I'm not 100% sure exactly how that's structured with Box Mining and Ivan on Tech. And I believe they'll have the option of, you know, declining whether to do a segment on a particular project. I can't imagine that they have to, they must, if they don't like a project, they seems like they should have the right not to.
Yeah. Well, mate, to be honest with you, I want to hear more of the outcome that they do invest in allocations. To me, that's you really standing up and saying that even with their big platforms, they believe in this long term. Because otherwise, you know, what's the point? You know, why are they as media partners just simply doing the paid thing when we're trying to evangelize something more? So fingers crossed, we start to hear that outcome. That's what I'd like to see. And I would imagine with Box Mining, that's what will happen. Who knows what will happen with Ivan? But he does have a track record of investing in certain projects. So let's see. But yeah, I would like to see also that. But yes, it's great to see that you have big platforms to get the word out. Now, what about other influencers, you know, in their circles, for example, like having known them for a while, having known of their circle, there's also consultants that work with other influencers associated with them. So are you also looking at other media partners out there like them with similar platforms?
Yeah, certainly. I think we're always looking to improve and expand the reach of the Foundry ecosystem. And so when opportunities or relationships come across our desk, we'll explore them. We may consider adding them on board. But where we stand today, on the eve of launching the first project and having there's about 25 influencers that we have, in the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
There's the 4 exchanges we've brought on. Of course, the partnership between Duck and Ferrum and guys like Phil. We're extremely happy with where we are right now. We're extremely excited about the future. I think the Foundry is going to do really well. But yeah, if people people approach us and they want to get on board, we'll who are we to just turn them down offhand? We'll entertain, and we'll see if it's a good fit.
Got it. As long as the price is right, of course, since these are paid positions. And also, I think, I appreciate the transparency. I'm sure with what you've said today that we'll learn of any changes or of any developments all along the way, whether it be from the influencer side, whether it be from the pipeline of incubated startups. Really looking forward to seeing this just emerge as something of a force when we desperately need change in this VC space. The DuckDAO sort of led the way as an example of what can be done, and you're kind of leading out something that is just extending upon that and sort of iterating on that. But time is an issue I was wondering about, Ian, because you're busy. Not only do you have a baby and you're a busy man in the real world, but you're also building out Ferrum. So how are you going to have time to do all of this? How are you going to successfully lead this out so that it is a force to be reckoned with?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I mean, we're all strapped for time in our personal lives and business, and I mean, it's a crazy time with Corona and everything. But one thing that made me realize that I did have the bandwidth for this is, we recently launched a staking as a service product, utilizing the existing Ferrum staking technology and essentially selling it to other projects who wanted staking. And a part of what I found myself doing was advising, unofficially, but advising nonetheless, a lot of these newer projects, because the staking service is very well suited to new projects. They might not have their own staking tech or what have you. And so I was already advising projects that I took to, not all of them, by the way, not every single, we have 25 staking projects we work with. I don't advise all of them, of course, but there's a handful that I've really taken to, that I like the founders, and I work very closely with, and I help them with different things in terms of if there's FUD in the channel, or they want a strategic advice on how to approach an exchange, or should they, what should they do with their Uniswap, just different stuff that, when I was a new founder, I had no idea, but now having done this for 2 years, I sort of know something. Mm-hmm. And so I had no problem imparting that, that wisdom to them. And so I view it as no different for the Foundry. Now, keep in mind, one of the requirements for joining the Foundry is the team itself has to be capable of creating content, right? Like, we can help. We have content creators. I'm always happy to review someone's blog post for editing purposes, but we can't create the content. You're right. I'm busy with Ferrum. Our business is doing very well. Our project is doing very well. I can't spend hours and hours, creating content for these projects. So that is handled by the team. Mm-hmm. We bring value in other areas, but yes, I mean, we make the time, and ultimately at the end of the day, there's a team behind us at the Foundry, and everybody's working. So it's not just me doing all the work.
Yeah, it makes sense, mate. Well, it's been a really long interview, and I hope that I haven't thrown too many sort of curveballs at you. And I really appreciate that you definitely allowed me to ask whatever I wanted without any prep. Thanks, mate, for just really exploring all the different aspects of the Foundry. I will say very transparently that I'm definitely interested in taking part in allocations. Now, just even listening to this conversation, I want to know more. And certainly, like, if I'm ever able to, and if ever I do partake, I will absolutely be following those guidelines of transparency and disclaiming anything that I, get involved with. But again, it comes down to all of us taking that time, the due diligence, understanding the whole system that is crypto, and most importantly, the value of legitimacy, the value of real teams building real tech and real utility. And the Foundry, from what we hear today, is definitely in the camp of long-term utility support. So thanks, mate, for everything that you do, everything that you've done at Ferrum, everything that you're about to showcase. And most importantly, know for everyone, more is coming for the Foundry, more particularly this week. We all want to know what it is. I certainly want to know more. But until then, I'll leave it to you for a final statement as well, Ian, and we can finish off the interview letting people know that the Foundry is here for the long position.
Wow, thank you so much for that amazing synopsis. Yeah, we're just excited. It's been a whirlwind past few months putting this together. We're on the eve of launching the first project, and yeah, I think it's really going to take the crypto world by storm, and we're just happy to be a part of it.
Fantastic, mate. Well, if you want to know about the Foundry, if you want to know more about Ian, if you want to know more about anything related to them, all the links from DuckDAO to the Foundry to various influencers, whatever I can find, I will put down below. But make sure that you really explore what is possible, what can be done with decentralized DeFi VCs, what can be done when it comes to more transparency, and what can be done with allowing people like you, yes, you, to get allocations if you do work. It's important that you know that there is a voice for you, and people are barracking for you in this space. Until next time, it's BlockchainBrad signing off.